We have the latest update on Sasha Banks and Naomi after walking out of Monday Night Raw and WWE this week. Plus, speaking of Raw, the ratings are up this week without any NBA playoff competition. All this and more in today's WWE news. Hey guys, welcome back to Wrestling News 365. Hope everyone is doing very well. As always, there are plenty of news stories to get into in the world of WWE. So let's start off talking about what everyone's talking about when it comes to WWE right now, and that is Sasha Banks and Naomi. We spoke about this yesterday, but we have new updates and the latest on why Naomi and Sasha Banks walked out of Monday Night Raw this week. Now, less than 24 hours later, well, now it's just over 24 hours later, the story of Naomi and Sasha Banks walking out on WWE Monday Night Raw continues to dominate all of the headlines in the pro wrestling space, pro wrestling media, whatever you want to call it. But a new report is providing some insight as to why the Women's Tag Team Champions made their decision to ultimately walk out of WWE on Monday night. Now, PW Insider has revealed that several sources have told them that the original plan for Banks and Naomi on Raw was this six-pack challenge match for the right to face Bianca Belair for the Raw Women's Championship at Hell in a Cell. That would have seen Naomi pin Sasha Banks to win the match and receive the title shot, which is odd because Fightful are saying, no, that's not the case. That definitely isn't the case. It's actually, she was going to pin someone else. She wasn't going to pin. She was going to pin, I think it was Nikki ASH. Nevertheless, PW Insider are now saying that Naomi was going to pin Sasha Banks to win the match and receive the title shot. Furthermore, Banks and Naomi would have been featured in several segments building to them facing off in the match. Post-main event, the partners would have celebrated Naomi's victory. Now, sources say Naomi would then go on to lose to Bianca Belair at Hell in a Cell, though not confirmed. It was also noted that some sources believe that Sasha Banks would go on to face SmackDown Women's Champion Ronda Rousey at the same event, with Sasha Banks also losing. It was also noted that this led to concerns from Banks and Naomi regarding creativity over the Women's Tag Team Championships, and later in the afternoon, an alternative idea was pitched that would have seen Banks and Naomi lose a short tag match to set up their next challengers. While PW Insider couldn't confirm it 100%, they noted one source told them that the planned opponents were Doudrop and Nikki ASH, who at one point were also scheduled for the six-pack challenge. Now, the report goes on to say that Sasha Banks and Naomi were told before Raw by producer Molly Holly that WWE was going forward with the plans for the six-pack challenge. This then led to Banks and Naomi informing WWE Executive Vice President of Talent Relations John Laurinaitis that they were leaving, giving him the WWE Women's Tag Team Championships in the process. Now, this report echoes WWE's statement regarding the matter during Monday Night Raw last night. So again, this is also important to state as well. This PW Insider report backs up WWE's statement. Doesn't necessarily mean it's true, because the chances are PW Insider, I'm assuming it's Mike Johnson, has probably spoken to a senior WWE source, probably one involved in writing that statement, so of course they would say whatever backs up the statement released. I'm sure if you spoke to Sasha Banks and Naomi, it might be something slightly different, because again, we're getting different details from different outlets at this point. Now, from there, it was said that Vince McMahon was informed of Banks and Naomi's departure either shortly before or shortly after Raw began. A backstage vignette between Becky Lynch and Adam Pearce setting up Asuka and Lynch as the main event was pitched on the spot, with McMahon approving of it. Now, one source suggested it was Lynch that came up with the idea for that segment. Finally, those backstage at WWE apparently did not believe Naomi or Sasha Banks took issue with the finish to the six-pack challenge, but rather the duo's creative going forward as the Women's Tag Team Champions. Now, it should be noted that PW Insider's report seems to confirm that Twitter thread from user at Adidas_head88, which reportedly was a friend maybe of Naomi. Naomi follows them on Twitter. They're a fan. I just don't know. The thread stated that Banks and Naomi had been upset with WWE for some time due to the promotion's handling of the Women's Tag Team Championships, which of course they won at WrestleMania 38. As of the time of recording this video, neither Naomi nor Sasha Banks has commented on their walkout or WWE's statement regarding their walkout. So the update, I suppose, is that this one just gets more and more complex, and it does remind me a lot of the CM Punk situation, and not so just because they just walked out, but when CM Punk walked out of WWE in January of 2014, the day after the Royal Rumble, the report that basically came out at the time was that he walked out, and then we were just bombarded with all of these different reports that were kind of saying the same thing, but there'd be these key details or these fundamental details that were slightly tweaked or slightly different. So you've got Fightful saying, yeah, they walked out because they weren't happy with the creative of the Women's Tag Team Championships going forward. And that seems to be the general consensus. But you've got PW Insider saying, well, the plan was, the creative was for that match is that Naomi was going to win, which every other outlet is saying. But they're also saying that Naomi was going to win by pinning Sasha Banks. On the other hand, you've got Fightful saying, yeah, Naomi was scheduled to win, but she wasn't going to pin Sasha Banks. She was going to be pinning Nikki ASH. And actually, that match was constructed and scheduled so that Naomi and Sasha Banks wouldn't even really be facing off. They wouldn't touch during that match because they wanted to preserve them being as Women's Tag Team Champions. So, as with anything, as with any story, and this isn't just pro wrestling, this is football, this is politics, this is whatever, I would assume the truth lies somewhere in between all of these details. Whenever you see a report online, and again, this isn't limited to pro wrestling, it's like panning for gold. You have to sieve it, you have to sieve it, and you have to sieve it, and eventually you'll find that gold somewhere in there. But you have to sieve out all of the inaccuracies and the disinformation or misinformation or incorrect reports, all that. And that's not to disrespect any of these outlets or any of these journalists, because I think they all do a really, really good job. But this is something that's just going to rumble on and on. You get the feeling for days and days and days to come. And eventually, it will lead to Sasha Banks and Naomi responding. I've seen a lot of people saying, no, this is it. That means they're leaving WWE. Not necessarily so. I was thinking about this earlier. Frankly, how WWE, and for that matter Vince McMahon, handled Sasha Banks in 2019 when she wanted to leave the company after WrestleMania 35, it almost deserves a ton of credit, because he really diffused that situation. She wanted to leave. She was out. I'm gone. I don't like being here anymore. I don't want to be here anymore. I'm done. And Vince McMahon said, no, we're not going to release you. Go on holiday. Take time off. Take 5 months off, take 6 months off. Eventually, you'll come back and we'll work with you again then. And just take some time away. And probably he developed that kind of mentality after incidents like the CM Punk incident, when if they'd have just left it, and if they'd have just let it breathe, and if they'd have just kept the line of dialogue open and all that kind of stuff, maybe CM Punk would have never left after all. Because if you listen to that Colt Cabana podcast, the infamous Colt Cabana podcast, he says that right before he was fired, he was thinking about going back. His contract was expiring, but he'd sort of spoken to some people and said, look, let's talk it out kind of situation, and they didn't budge on that. So I expect a similar kind of situation here. Are Naomi and Sasha Banks going to be on SmackDown on Friday? As of Wednesday right now, I think it looks unlikely, but you never know. But I think they maybe let it breathe. They then try and have an open, line of dialogue, or a line of conversation, and then maybe they'll see what happens. But there is just so much information out there right now. There are so many details and so many stories which you can believe and you can't believe. But the general consensus, and what appears to be accurate, is that, of course, Sasha Banks and Naomi walked out of Raw. It's not a work, it's a shoot. They're not happy with the creative of the Women's Tag Team Championships. And that's probably the most concrete thing that we know. And Naomi was scheduled to win that match. That's all we really, truly know. We don't know if Naomi was meant to pin Sasha Banks or not. We don't know if Sasha Banks was meant to be facing Ronda Rousey at Hell in a Cell or not. All of it makes a lot of sense, but doesn't necessarily mean it's true. So it's an interesting one. It's certainly one that, again, we're going to have to keep an eye on, because it's developing all the time, and put it this way, this is not the last time we're going to talk about it here on the channel. It's a big story, and it will continue to develop and escalate, I'm sure of that. Speaking of Raw, let's talk about the ratings for this week's episode. WWE Raw on the USA Network this past Monday saw a minor ratings increase from last week's episode. Raw averaged 1.736 million viewers for this past Monday night, according to Showbuzz Daily. The audience was up 5% from last week. However, last week's episode faced competition from the NBA playoffs. It was the best audience, though, for the show since the April 11th episode, which was the last time that actually Raw didn't have any competition from the NBA playoffs. So you can easily see what the issue is when it comes to competition for Monday Night Raw. Raw, though, was easily the number one show on cable in the 18 to 49 demographic with a 0.45 rating. That rating is up 2.3% from last week, and it was the best key demo rating for the show since the April 18th episode, which was opposed by the NBA playoffs too. That coded countdown seemed to work as the third hour 18 to 49 rating beat the first hour and was tied with the second, which is very, very rare. So again, fair enough. Fair enough. The overall audience audience drop of 5.9% from hour 1 to hour 3 was bigger than last week, but it was the fourth smallest of the year so far. Now, year over year, Raw was down 4.8% in total viewers, while the key demo rating was down 6.3%, as is par for the course when it comes to ratings in professional wrestling. Last year's episode did not face any significant sports competition, it must be said as well. So they'll be happy with that. They did the upfronts, WWE, specifically for Raw and for SmackDown. They were at the Fox and NBC Universal upfronts, and Stephanie McMahon and WWE, they were very, forthcoming about how well they're doing in terms of, the key demographics. And it's funny because people can laugh at AEW and say, the key demos don't matter. They really do. Because when they go to these upfronts, they say to these advertisers, Raw is the number one show on cable on Monday night. Not in terms of viewers, but in terms of those key demos. And their ears go like this. They go, really? Because if I advertise my product on there, that's the audience I want to advertise it to. And guess what? They might buy my product. So that's why the key demos matter. So WWE and Vince McMahon and all that kind of stuff will be very happy about that. But anyway, guys, let me know your thoughts on today's WWE news stories in the comment section below. Be sure to like and subscribe to Wrestling News 365, and I'll speak to you again very, very soon.